The television courtroom had never witnessed such pure, unfiltered arrogance from someone who genuinely believed their family's political power made them immune to consequences. 22-year-old Ashley Hartwell sat in the defendant's chair with the kind of smug superiority that could only come from a lifetime of watching her state senator father make every problem disappear with a phone call to the right judge or prosecutor. Her designer Prada handbag sat casually on the table beside her latest iPhone, which she continued scrolling through despite being in active court proceedings, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen as if Judge Judy.Her Next was merely an inconvenience interrupting her social media schedule. What happened in the next 12 minutes would shock not just Ashley, not just the packed courtroom, but millions of viewers across America and trigger a federal corruption investigation that would bring down one of the state's most powerful political families. When Ashley actually laughed in Judge Judy's face and declared that her father makes judges and that Judge Judy should learn her place, the silence that followed was so profound that even the camera operators stopped moving, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented in courtroom television history. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane and why it became the most shared courtroom moment in internet history with over 150 million views in just 72 hours. Ashley didn't just lose her case. She didn't just get embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy did to her in those 12 minutes was so devastatingly precise, so righteously furious, and so perfectly calibrated to expose an entire network of political corruption that it ended her father's career, triggered multiple federal investigations, led to criminal charges against a sitting state senator, and transformed this entitled young woman from untouchable politician's daughter into a cautionary tale that would be taught in law schools and ethics courses for years to come. Judge Judy had spent 3 nights reviewing evidence provided by a whistleblower from Senator William Hartwell's own office, evidence that documented 19 separate incidents where Ashley had destroyed property or harmed people and her father had used his political power to make the consequences disappear through intimidation, bribery, and abuse of official processes. Before we show you the exact moment when Ashley Hartwell learned that some judges cannot be bought, threatened, or intimidated regardless of whose daughter you are, you need to understand who these people really were and what brought them to this explosive confrontation that would change everything. Because this wasn't just about one spoiled young woman mocking a television judge. This was about systematic political corruption that had been protected by power and position for over a decade. This was about David Kim, a 28-year-old first-generation immigrant who had used his entire life savings of $45,000 to open a small coffee shop, only to have it deliberately destroyed by a drunk and enraged Ashley Hartwell who laughed while causing $20,000 in damage and then posted on Instagram that her father would make sure the victim never collected a penny. This was about Senator William Hartwell, who had spent 12 years building a network of corrupt judges, prosecutors, and police officials who would do his bidding in exchange for campaign contributions, political appointments, and under-the-table payments. And this was about Judge Judy.Her Next, who had built her entire reputation on one unshakable principle that would define this case and everything that followed: the law applies equally to everyone, or it means nothing at all. Hit that like button right now if you believe that politicians' children should be held to exactly the same standards as everyone else and that no one, regardless of their last name or their father's position, should be above accountability. Subscribe because what Judge Judy reveals about the Hartwell family's pattern of corruption and abuse of power will absolutely blow your mind and restore your faith that some people in positions of authority still cannot be corrupted, threatened, or silenced by political power. Trust me, the next 30 minutes will show you exactly what happens when entitled privilege built on corrupt political connections finally meets someone who has the evidence, the courage, and the platform to expose the truth to millions of people who are tired of watching powerful families escape consequences while ordinary people suffer. Ashley Hartwell had spent 22 years learning one fundamental lesson that shaped her entire worldview and personality: consequences were things that happened to other people, never to her. As the only daughter of State Senator William Hartwell, one of the most powerful and politically connected men in state government, she had grown up watching her father make problems disappear with phone calls that happened behind closed doors. Her earliest memory of understanding her privilege came at age 16 when she was caught cheating on her final exams at her exclusive private school, a violation that would have resulted in expulsion for any other student. The headmaster had called her into his office with every intention of enforcing the school's zero-tolerance academic integrity policy. But then her father arrived, spent 20 minutes alone with the headmaster, and suddenly the incident was being characterized as a misunderstanding, the evidence was being reconsidered, and Ashley was walking out without even a note in her permanent record. That was the day she learned that rules applied to everyone except her, that her last name was worth more than truth, and that her father's political power meant she could live life without ever facing real consequences for her actions. By the time Ashley Hartwell graduated from college at 21, she had compiled a record of destructive behavior that would have landed any other young adult in jail or at minimum with a serious criminal record that would follow them for life. But Ashley wasn't any other young adult. She was the daughter of a state senator who chaired the powerful appropriations committee that controlled millions in state funding, and that distinction had become her shield against every form of accountability. Her social media presence told the story of someone living a consequence-free existence funded by privilege and protected by corruption. Her Instagram account boasted 120,000 followers who watched her post pictures of designer shopping sprees, luxury vacations to Europe and the Caribbean, bottle service at exclusive clubs she was too young to legally enter, and casual displays of wealth that came not from any work she had done but from her position as Senator Hartwell's daughter. Her bio read simply, "blessed and untouchable," with a crown emoji, and she genuinely believed both parts of that statement were equally true. The incidents had started in high school but escalated dramatically once Ashley entered college and realized that her father's power extended even beyond their home state. At 19, she had been arrested for driving under the influence with a blood alcohol content of .17, more than twice the legal limit. The arresting officer had been young and idealistic, following proper procedure exactly as he had been trained. He documented everything, he preserved the evidence, and he filed charges that should have resulted in license suspension, mandatory alcohol education, and potentially jail time for a first offense that severe. Within 24 hours, the charges had disappeared from the system entirely. The breathalyzer results were declared inadmissible due to a technicality that the officer knew was fabricated. The video evidence from his dashboard camera had been corrupted in a way that the department's IT specialist said was suspicious but unprovable. The officer received a call from his captain suggesting he had mishandled the arrest and that pursuing the case would reflect poorly on his performance review. He resigned from the department 3 months later, disgusted by a system he had joined to serve justice but that clearly had different rules for different people. The most revealing pattern in Ashley's history of destructive behavior was not just the incidents themselves but how systematically her father's office made each problem disappear using the machinery of state government as a weapon against anyone who dared to seek accountability. When Ashley assaulted a sorority rival during her sophomore year, sending the young woman to the emergency room with a broken nose and a concussion, the victim initially filed both a police report and a civil lawsuit seeking medical expenses. Within 1 week, the victim's parents received a surprise audit notice from the state tax authority. Within 2 weeks, the father's small contracting business suddenly failed 3 separate licensing inspections that it had passed without issue for 15 years. Within 3 weeks, the victim dropped all charges and signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for $15,000 paid from a legal defense fund that Senator Hartwell controlled. The message was clear to anyone paying attention: crossing the Hartwell family came with consequences that extended far beyond any individual incident and reached into every aspect of your life where the state government had power to make things difficult. Ashley's behavior escalated because she had learned through direct experience that there were no real boundaries on her actions. At 20, she had been caught on security cameras stealing over $3,000 worth of jewelry from an upscale boutique. The owner, an immigrant from Lebanon who had built her business over 20 years of hard work and careful financial management, filed charges with clear video evidence showing Ashley concealing merchandise and leaving without paying. The prosecution should have been straightforward, but the district attorney who had received $50,000 in campaign contributions from Senator Hartwell personally reviewed the case and declared there was insufficient evidence to proceed despite video that showed exactly what had happened. When the boutique owner protested and took her evidence to local media, the state occupational licensing board suddenly launched an investigation into her business practices. Her commercial lease came up for review and the building was declared in violation of updated fire codes that would require hundreds of thousands in renovations. She settled for having the charges dropped and never spoke publicly about the incident again, another victim silenced by a system that protected the powerful and punished anyone who challenged them. The incident that would finally bring Ashley to Judge Judy's courtroom and trigger the exposure of her entire family's corruption happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the parking lot of a small shopping district in the downtown area. David Kim had opened his coffee shop 6 months earlier after 6 years of working 3 jobs simultaneously to save the $45,000 he needed for equipment, initial inventory, rent deposits, and operating capital to survive the difficult first months when most small businesses fail. His parents had immigrated from South Korea when he was 5 years old, working factory jobs and cleaning offices at night so their children could have opportunities they never had. David had graduated from community college with a business degree earned through night classes while working full-time, and his coffee shop represented not just his dream but his family's dream of achieving success through hard work, integrity, and service to their community. He had hired 8 employees from his neighborhood, creating jobs and serving as a gathering place where elderly Korean immigrants could read newspapers from home and young families could afford good coffee without going to expensive corporate chains. Ashley Hartwell had parked her white Range Rover across 2 parking spaces directly in front of David Kim's coffee shop, one of which was clearly marked as handicapped parking with the proper signage and blue painted lines that were impossible to miss. David was helping an elderly customer carry her order to her car when he noticed Ashley's vehicle blocking the handicapped space that his regular customer, Mrs. Chen, needed to park safely. He approached Ashley's vehicle politely and professionally, the way any responsible business owner would handle a parking situation that was affecting his customers. Ashley was sitting in her car scrolling through Instagram, completely oblivious to the fact that she had parked illegally in a space designated for people with disabilities. David knocked gently on her window and asked politely if she could please move her vehicle so that his elderly customer could use the handicapped space as intended. Ashley's response was to roll down her window and deliver a line she had clearly used many times before with complete confidence that it would end any disagreement in her favor. "Do you know who I am? My father is Senator Hartwell. He basically owns this city." David remained calm and professional despite the entitled attitude radiating from Ashley's tone and body language. He explained again that the space was designated for handicapped parking and that he had a customer who needed it, and that she could easily park in one of the many regular spaces available in the lot. Ashley's face transformed from casual dismissiveness to genuine anger that anyone would dare to ask her a second time to do something she didn't want to do. She got out of her vehicle, stood in David's personal space in a deliberately intimidating way despite being several inches shorter than him, and told him that he clearly didn't understand how things worked in this city. She informed him that her father controlled the permits and licenses for every business in the downtown district, that she could park wherever she wanted, and that if he asked her again to move her car she would make sure his little coffee shop was shut down by the end of the week. David, who had dealt with difficult customers before but never with someone who casually threatened his livelihood over a parking space, simply repeated that he needed her to move so his customer could park. That simple repetition of a reasonable request apparently constituted an unforgivable insult to someone who had never been told no and meant it. What happened next was captured on David's security cameras from 3 different angles and would become the evidence that finally brought Ashley's pattern of destruction into a courtroom where her father's power couldn't reach. Ashley got back into her Range Rover, started the engine, and instead of pulling forward out of the spaces, she deliberately put the vehicle in reverse and backed directly into David's personal car which was parked legally in an adjacent space. The impact was clearly intentional, the crushing sound of metal and shattering glass echoing through the parking lot as Ashley's luxury SUV demolished the front end of David's 10-year-old Honda Civic. The damage was extensive and immediate, the hood crumpled, the bumper torn off, the headlights shattered, and the radiator punctured in a way that meant the car was likely totaled. But Ashley wasn't finished demonstrating what happened to people who didn't immediately submit to her demands. She pulled forward, turned her steering wheel, and then accelerated directly toward the outdoor seating area of David's coffee shop. Tables and chairs went flying as her Range Rover crashed through the carefully arranged patio furniture, destroying the custom-built wooden pergola that David had installed himself, shattering the decorative planters that his wife had selected, and smashing into the building's facade hard enough to crack the brick and shatter the large front window. The total damage was devastating both financially and emotionally for David and his family. His personal vehicle had sustained $8,500 in damage and was declared a total loss by his insurance company. The business property damage included $12,000 in destroyed furniture, equipment, building repairs, and lost revenue during the days he would need to be closed for repairs. The total of $20,500 represented nearly half of everything David had saved over 6 years of sacrifice and brutal work schedules. But the financial damage was only part of what made this incident so destructive to David's life and livelihood. Ashley had sat in her damaged Range Rover for a moment after the crash, surveyed the destruction she had deliberately caused, and then started laughing. She actually laughed at the sight of a small business owner's life being destroyed because he had politely asked her to follow parking laws. She pulled out her phone, took several photographs of the damage, and posted them to her Instagram story with a caption that would become evidence in multiple investigations. The post read, "Some people need to learn their place. Daddy fixes everything," with a series of laughing emojis and a hashtag that said "Daddy makes it go away." Multiple witnesses had observed the entire incident from inside the coffee shop and from neighboring businesses. They saw Ashley deliberately back into David's car. They saw her accelerate into the outdoor seating area. They heard her laughing and bragging about how her father would make sure David never collected any money for the damage. Several witnesses immediately offered to provide statements to police and testified that this was clearly not an accident but a deliberate attack by someone who believed she was immune to consequences. David called the police immediately, filed a comprehensive report with multiple witness statements attached, and provided security camera footage from 3 different angles that showed exactly what Ashley had done and proved beyond any doubt that every bit of the damage was intentional and malicious. The responding officer took the report seriously, documented everything properly, and forwarded the case to the Detective Division for follow-up investigation and potential criminal charges for malicious destruction of property. What David Kim didn't know when he filed that police report with confidence that the clear evidence and multiple witnesses would result in justice was that he had just entered a system that Senator William Hartwell had spent 12 years corrupting specifically to protect his family from exactly this kind of accountability. Within 48 hours of the incident, David's carefully documented police report had been assigned to a detective who happened to be the brother-in-law of Senator Hartwell's chief of staff. The investigation that should have been straightforward given the video evidence and witness statements somehow stalled immediately. David called repeatedly asking for updates and was told that the detective was reviewing the evidence and would contact him soon. Days turned into weeks with no progress, no communication, and no indication that anyone was taking his case seriously despite having documentation that would have resulted in immediate charges against any other defendant. Meanwhile, mysterious problems began appearing in David's life with suspicious timing that he initially attributed to coincidence but would later understand as deliberate intimidation tactics deployed by Senator Hartwell's political machine. The city's business licensing department suddenly flagged David's coffee shop for a comprehensive review of permits that had been approved without issue just 6 months earlier when he opened. A health inspector arrived unannounced and cited violations that David's previous inspections had never mentioned, threatening closure if expensive modifications weren't made immediately. The fire marshal declared his outdoor seating area non-compliant with codes that had been updated the previous week, requiring thousands in additional repairs beyond what Ashley's attack had already cost him. David's parents, still living in South Korea and completely uninvolved in his business, began receiving strange phone calls from people claiming to be conducting background investigations and asking pointed questions about their son's immigration status despite David being a natural-born American citizen. Every aspect of David's life that touched any government agency or official process suddenly became complicated, delayed, or problematic in ways that seemed designed to send a clear message about what happened to people who pursued complaints against the Hartwell family. David hired an attorney who reviewed his case and delivered devastating news that crushed his hope for justice through normal channels. The attorney explained that while the evidence was overwhelming and would normally result in criminal charges and civil liability, David was fighting against one of the most politically powerful families in the state. The local district attorney had received tens of thousands in campaign contributions from Senator Hartwell and was essentially a political ally who would be unlikely to prosecute the senator's daughter regardless of evidence. The judges in the local court system had been appointed through a process where Senator Hartwell's endorsement was crucial, creating conflicts of interest that made getting a fair hearing nearly impossible. David's only realistic option for any kind of justice or financial recovery was small claims court, where the amounts were limited but where Senator Hartwell's political influence theoretically had less reach. When David's attorney learned that Judge Judy's show was interested in the case after a producer saw Ashley's Instagram post and the security footage that had been shared online, he told David this might be his only chance to get a fair hearing from someone who couldn't be threatened or bought by political power. Judge Judy's courtroom was unusually packed on the day of the hearing with an audience that included several of Ashley's previous victims who had come to watch someone finally stand up to the family that had destroyed their lives and silenced them with intimidation. Local investigative reporters were present because they had received anonymous tips that something significant was going to be revealed about Senator Hartwell's pattern of corruption. Ashley's social media followers were aware of the court date because she had posted about it multiple times with her characteristic arrogance, promising her followers that she was about to teach a TV judge that some people are untouchable and above the law. Senator Hartwell himself sat prominently in the front row of the courtroom audience in a power move designed to intimidate Judge Judy and remind everyone watching that he was a man of significant political influence who expected deference and favorable treatment even in venues where he theoretically had no official power. David Kim entered the courtroom first, wearing his best clothes which were still modest compared to the designer outfits that Ashley would arrive in 30 minutes late. He carried a thick binder containing security camera footage burned to DVD, printed witness statements, repair estimates from multiple contractors, photographs documenting every angle of the damage, and copies of the Instagram posts where Ashley had bragged about the incident and mocked the idea that she would face consequences. His wife sat beside him 7 months pregnant with their first child, providing moral support for a moment that represented everything they had worked for and everything they stood to lose if Ashley's father succeeded in making this case disappear like he had made 19 previous incidents vanish. David's hands shook slightly as he organized his evidence on the table, knowing that he was about to face not just Ashley but the entire weight of her family's political power and corrupt influence. Ashley Hartwell made her entrance exactly the way Judge Judy had expected based on 3 days of research into her background and pattern of behavior. She arrived 30 minutes late without apology or explanation, forcing the entire courtroom to wait while she finished whatever she considered more important than legal proceedings. She wore an outfit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, carried shopping bags from luxury stores as if she had just been inconvenienced by having to interrupt her day for this trivial matter, and kept her phone out actively scrolling through social media even as she took her seat at the defendant's table. Senator Hartwell stood when his daughter entered, smiling confidently at Judge Judy in a gesture that communicated his expectation that his presence and position would influence the proceedings. 2 expensive attorneys flanked the senator, occasionally whispering to him and taking notes in a coordinated display of legal firepower designed to intimidate anyone watching. Judge Judy observed all of this with the calm, analytical expression of someone who had spent 35 years learning to identify liars, manipulators, and people who believed they were above accountability, and every instinct she had developed over decades told her that she was looking at a family that had corrupted the justice system and destroyed innocent people without ever facing consequences. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her characteristic directness, asking David Kim to explain what had happened and present his evidence. David's testimony was clear, professional, and backed by security footage that showed from multiple angles exactly what Ashley had done. The video was damning and irrefutable, showing Ashley deliberately backing into his car, then accelerating into his business's outdoor seating area, and finally sitting in her vehicle laughing while surveying the destruction she had caused. David presented witness statements from 7 people who had observed the entire incident and confirmed that it was deliberate and malicious. He showed repair estimates totaling $20,500 and explained that this amount represented nearly half of everything he had saved over 6 years to open his business. Throughout his testimony, Ashley sat scrolling through her phone, occasionally rolling her eyes or sighing loudly enough for the microphones to pick up, treating the entire proceeding as if it were an annoying interruption to her day rather than a legal proceeding where she was being held accountable for deliberate destruction of property. When Judge Judy asked Ashley to explain her version of events, Ashley didn't even pretend to deny what she had done. She admitted hitting David's car and crashing into his business but characterized her actions as justified because David had been disrespectful by asking her twice to move her vehicle from the handicapped parking space. She actually said that David deserved what happened because he didn't know who she was and had treated her like a regular person instead of showing the deference she believed her last name entitled her to receive. Judge Judy pressed her about the damage and asked why she shouldn't have to pay for property she had deliberately destroyed. Ashley's response revealed everything about how she viewed herself and her place in the world. She said that David was nobody, that her father was Senator Hartwell who basically owned the city, and that people like David should be grateful that important families like hers even noticed them. The courtroom erupted in gasps at the casual cruelty and open contempt in Ashley's words, but she seemed genuinely confused about why anyone would find her attitude problematic. The turning point came when Senator Hartwell himself stood up from the audience in an unprecedented breach of courtroom protocol, attempting to address Judge Judy directly and explain that there had been a misunderstanding that he was certain could be resolved reasonably. Judge Judy's response was immediate and uncompromising. She told Senator Hartwell that he was not a party to this case, that his presence was inappropriate and intimidating, and that he needed to sit down immediately or she would hold him in contempt of court. The senator tried to continue speaking, suggesting that Judge Judy didn't understand the full context of the situation, but Judge Judy cut him off with a tone that made clear she would not be intimidated by his position or power. She ordered the bailiff to escort Senator Hartwell from the courtroom if he spoke again, and the senator finally sat down but made a throat-cutting gesture toward his attorney that the cameras captured perfectly. Ashley's confidence wavered slightly for the first time as she realized that her father's usual intimidation tactics were not working on this particular judge. Judge Judy then asked Ashley a direct question that would seal her fate and trigger everything that followed. She asked if Ashley had ever destroyed anyone else's property without facing consequences. Ashley, still believing that her honesty couldn't hurt her because her father's power would protect her regardless of what she admitted, said that maybe she had but that people exaggerated and when you came from an important family everyone wanted money from you. Judge Judy pressed further, asking about specific previous incidents that her research team had uncovered. Ashley responded with increasing irritation, finally snapping that Judge Judy was just a TV judge, basically an actress, while her father dealt with real judges who understood that some families were more important than others. The courtroom went completely silent as Ashley delivered the line that would destroy her life and her father's career. She actually laughed, turned to face the camera, and said that her father makes judges, that he gets to decide who sits on the bench, and that Judge Judy should learn her place before lecturing people like the Hartwells about responsibility. Judge Judy stood up slowly, something she almost never did during proceedings, and the symbolism was not lost on anyone present. She opened a folder marked with the Hartwell family name and began systematically presenting evidence that she had obtained from a whistleblower in Senator Hartwell's office. She listed all 19 previous incidents where Ashley had destroyed property or harmed people and her father had made the consequences disappear through intimidation and corruption. She presented financial records showing illegal use of campaign funds to pay off victims. She played a recording of Senator Hartwell telling an associate that judges do what he tells them because he controls their political futures. She showed text messages between Ashley and her father discussing how to fix problems and silence victims. She presented documentation of payments to public officials and evidence of witnesses being threatened with immigration investigations, business license revocations, and tax audits if they pursued complaints against Ashley. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely devastating to any claim that this was just one isolated incident rather than a pattern of systematic corruption. Judge Judy's ruling was swift and comprehensive. She awarded David Kim the full $35,500 including punitive damages for Ashley's malicious conduct. But she didn't stop there. She announced that she was referring the entire matter to the FBI Public Corruption Unit, the State Attorney General, the Federal Election Commission, and the State Bar Association. She stated clearly for the record and for the millions of viewers watching that the evidence showed systematic corruption that had turned public institutions into weapons against innocent people, and that she would not allow her courtroom to be part of covering up those crimes. She ordered Ashley to make public apologies to all 19 victims, to complete 500 hours of community service, and to face potential criminal charges if investigators determined that her actions warranted prosecution. Then Judge Judy delivered a statement that would be replayed millions of times across every platform and become a defining moment in television history. She told Ashley that real power wasn't buying judges or threatening immigrants or using political position to destroy people who dared to hold you accountable. Real power was the rule of law applied equally to everyone, and that some judges still couldn't be bought, threatened, or intimidated by corrupt politicians who thought their position put them above accountability. The aftermath was immediate and catastrophic for the Hartwell family. The episode went viral with 150 million views in 72 hours. The FBI expanded their already existing investigation. Senator Hartwell was indicted on 15 counts of corruption and ultimately convicted and sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Ashley completed her community service and eventually became an advocate for accountability and reform. David Kim's business thrived with support from people inspired by his courage. The case triggered legislative reforms in 40 states and became a symbol of what happens when someone finally stands up to corruption with evidence, courage, and a platform that corrupt politicians cannot control or silence.